over the course of 2.5 years on nights and weekends, we had to limit some options for us as streamlined as possible. So every time we came back, it was as consistent as possible. Shooting on film nowadays, there's a bit of a modernity to it. All film now is Vision 3 film stock, which is sort of the most advanced the tech has ever been. Super modern, high res processing and scanning, and you have so much more control over the image. So there is a blend of like it is an analog process that sort of goes through a digital workflow at the end of it.
Hi, I'm Gordon Merkel from FilmmakerU.com. At FilmmakerU, we create courses for film professionals to deepen and diversify your existing skill set. You can learn more at FilmmakerU.com, of course, on Instagram at Filmmaker_U. Every week, we interview a film professional to discuss their work, and this week, I'm joined by cinematographer Matheus Bastos, who recently shot the feature film Gazer. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me. So happy to be here.
I guess how did you get involved with this film?
Yeah, so Gazer is sort of a I call it like a long time coming kind of story. I'm really good friends with both co-writers, the director Ryan Sloan, and the co-writer and star Ariella Mastriani. We grew up in the same town, but we never knew each other. Funny enough, we grew up like blocks from each other, same neighborhood, but just never connected. And then went to the same college as Ryan. Never met him while we were in school, and we all came up in the music scene together, just sort of playing in different bands, and knew all the same people, but never met each other. And it wasn't until we ended up on a short film about 7 or 8 years ago that we met and sort of found this like immediate connection with each other and started this friendship. And I was gaffing on a short film. Ariella was doing helping with wardrobes and other PA work, and Ryan was the first AD, and we just sort of immediately connected and started creating together that year. And we did our first short film together that year, a couple other music videos and other projects, and then 7 years later, at post pandemic, there's a couple years where I moved away for a little bit, so Ryan and I didn't really get the chance to work together as often. And post pandemic, right when the pandemic happened, everyone kind of came back and settled down a bit. And Ryan and Ariella were just feeling really frustrated at the state of films that were getting made, but also the films that they were making, and they really wanted to find a project, or I should say create a project that they would pay money to go see in a theater. And so they sort of hunkered down during the pandemic. They wrote Gazer, and in early 2021, Ryan called me and said, "Hey, I got a script for you. I want you to read it. And this is the a movie I'm making called Gazer, and I'd love for you to shoot it." And the rest is kind of history.
So I want to talk about the look of the film because
Mhm.
I did you shoot it on Super 16 or did you use
Yes.
processing? So like tell me, I guess figuring out the look and what your process was.
Yeah. Yes. Like you said, we shot the film on 16 millimeter Kodak celluloid, and that was sort of a decision that was made honestly even before I ever came on board. Before I signed on as the official DP, Ryan and Ariella had shot a sort of I guess you call it like a proof of concept trailer or like an investor trailer with another DP, a very talented DP, and they shot that on film. And in the couple of years that Ryan and I weren't able to work together, he found a real affinity for film and found a real passion for shooting on celluloid, and just felt like that's what he needed to do in his life and his career, and wanted to fight for that. And so when they brought the script to me and we read it in our first meeting, he said, "Listen, it's sort of a non-negotiable for me to shoot on film." And he said, "Are you okay with that?" And I love film. I haven't ever shot a full project on film. I've done either some mixed media stuff or a short film in film school or a music video or something, but this was the first opportunity to actually to shoot a full feature length film on film. And I said, you know what? Like, it's usually the other way around. The DP is usually the one trying to fight for the director to like let them do something on film.
Mhm.
And this was an instance where Ryan said, like, no, I need to shoot this on film. Are you okay with that? And I said, let's do it. And so, part of the look was to it is the because of the budget of the film and the minimal resources we had, and the fact that we were shooting it over the course of 2.5 years on nights and weekends, we had to sort of lean into limited resources, but also limit limit some options for us to make it like as streamlined as possible. So every time we came back, it was as consistent as possible. And so, shooting on film nowadays, there's a bit of a modernity to it, meaning all film now is Vision 3 film stock, which is sort of the most advanced the tech has ever been. um Also, super modern high res processing and scanning, and we're not doing color timing with our printer lights and RGB things that where if you want a little more like warmth to the image, it's doing it globally. Now we do digital DI where you have so much more control over the image. So there is a blend of like it is an analog process that sort of goes through a digital workflow at the end of it. And so
Mhm.
because of that, we knew that the look would have a slight modernity to it, but we leaned in on a lot of classical sort of I would say filmmaking techniques to get a bit of a blended look to feel like it was leaning towards the films that we were inspired by, which was the paranoia films of the 70s, and the like the Pakula trilogy, all the President's Men. I was really inspired by films like Seven and The Wrestler, and so for me that meant like shooting tungsten film during the day, which produces a very blue kind of color cast to the image because our film takes place in the turning of the season, so we knew that was important. Or we did a lot of um processes like pushing the film a stop for all of our nightmare scenes to introduce more saturation, more grain, more contrast, almost like a grindhouse kind of look. And so there was a lot of like these classical things we would do, typically like overexposing film, underexposing film, shooting the film stock the wrong way to get a different color cast.
Mhm.
And then on the tail end of that, in our sort of digital pipeline, we would take the film to the DI, and our amazing colorist, Ryan Berger, had a little more control, or I should say a lot more control than what we would have had if we actually made this film in the 80s or 90s, where we'd just be dealing with printer lights and RGB and just having sort of broader brushstrokes of control, where now we had a little more you can almost call it like a by the numbers coloring book where I want this shadow to be more purple and the highlights to be more gold, and you can have that control now where you didn't have that a while ago.
When I think about the film stock, because like you said, you sort of for the nightmare scenes made it rainier and pushed it and
Mhm.
what have you. But I'm wondering because as you mentioned, they've been working to perfect film so much
Yeah.
that like the grain is so tight that you can't really see it in a lot of places. So was there what were some of the I guess like did you have problems trying to make it more look like because it does feel like a 70 like one of my notes is
Mhm.
was going to ask you about your influences because I could see sort of like the 70s and Cronenberg and what have
Yeah.
you. But I'm wondering with something that's so pristine, like how did you get it to make it look, I guess, 70s-ish?
Yeah. Yeah. I guess, one thing that I'd say probably the biggest help is having shot it on 16 millimeter rather than 35. I feel like, I love all film formats from Super 8 to 65, but I find that 35 millimeter these days, when shot in a typical way, typical just meaning like you're exposing right and you're watching your values and stuff,
Mhm.
35 does, and maybe it's sacrilegious to say, doesn't look super dissimilar from digital just in terms of like clarity and sharpness. And that's like you were saying, they're working so hard to get the Vision 3 film stock to be a viable option for films that need a lot of VFX or films that need to go You shoot anamorphic, so you actually need to make the most use of your resolution. And they're trying to get film scanners to look better than ever, so that we do have the ability to do a lot of the same things we might do with digital, which is punching in, panning and scanning, or even just to blow up a. If you think about it, a film cell is maybe yay big, and then you want to blow it up to a 40-foot screen, and so I think there's a lot of effort being put into doing that, which is a good thing. And so I think us sort of bumping down to 16 millimeter immediately just introduces that grain that you want. The resolution, even though you can scan 16 millimeter film up to 5 or 6K, I think is sort of the limit. It's only ever going to get so good to be seen on a digital format or projection. So I think shooting on the 16 millimeter definitely lends itself towards that older feeling, even though a lot of those films we were admired by, that we admired, shot on 35. And I think now with its sort of modern day advancements, 16, new 16 can sometimes feel like old 35, if that makes sense. And so it's really that's probably the biggest thing. And then like I said, playing into the lighting, playing into sort of its richness and saturation, playing into the contrast. And because of the limitations we had for the film, we couldn't overlight so many things, like maybe some of the old, and not to say that Gordon Willis is an overlighter, but maybe they had slower film stock, so they had to use slightly harder light, or just a presence of more light. They didn't have the pushing film technology. Anyone from Savidi, I know Savidi, I'm naming people that are do a lot, but like Savidi, Gordon Willis, Darius Kanji, they actually place more so in the darker parts of the image, which is all to say, well, we did kind of the same. We wanted to play with the idea that like we can't overlight this movie because we don't have the resources. So let's lean into shadow. Let's lean into sort of the noisier grain. But then where it makes sense for all of our daytime stuff, I would often overexpose a stop to get a cleaner negative. So even that technique just actually further separates what our night work looks like versus the day work. And sometimes the result of the look is actually a product of like the environment itself. For the warehouse scenes that we shot on the film, I didn't have the resources to light an entire warehouse. So what I would often do is I would have my sort of movie lights, I guess you can call them, like our continuous lighting that is more color accurate, more proper dimmable technology. And I would mix it with stuff that I couldn't control, which would be gross overhead fluorescence or sodium vapor streetlights, etc. And I find that with on film, I try not to differentiate film and digital too much, but the one thing film does absolutely better than digital, in my opinion, is blend sort of colors on skin really well. And so suddenly, whether it's the gas station or the warehouse scenes or some of the night work, you're mixing sort of perfectly tuned film lighting with really gross, ugly mixed sodium vapor lights, fluorescent overheads, etc. And it actually blends really well on the skin, and it creates a look that is something I would not have been able to do if I actually lit it all with real movie lights.
There seems to, like, you sort of touched on this a bit before, but like the nightmares or the dream sequences versus the real sequences, like what did you and the director sort of determine you wanted for those looks, and like how did you sort of figure that out as a team?
So I kind of been touching on different techniques and color. So, like I said, for sort of the reality stuff, like I mentioned before, we shot tungsten film during the day, uncorrected, meaning film that is meant to be shot in a warm setting, shot in a cool setting, makes for a more blue image. So that was something we leaned into for a lot of the reality stuff. And then when we went to the nightmare scenes, we would shoot a higher rate tungsten stock. So instead of 200 T, maybe we went to 500, pushed it a stop. So it's the equivalent of 1,000 T. And then all of a sudden it's adding, like I said, contrast, saturation, grain, etc. And we actually let those overtly warm to really separate the almost like hot, sweaty, hellish nightmare scene, something that's really intense and overbearing, with this cold, brisk, windy kind of reality. And so I would say those are the biggest things as far as like the color look goes. But there's also a difference in sort of camera language and camera movement. When we are outside with Frankie in the real world, um, the film is all handheld, and or most of the film is handheld. But when we're outside with Frankie in the real world, the film is very handheld, and we're always with her. And the camera is more kinetic. The camera is a little more manic, chaotic. We're never ahead of Frankie. It's really important in this movie to know that the audience does not know more than her. So every single choice, camera movement, cut, POV, follow, or a leading sequence is entirely informed by Frankie and her sort of mental state in the film. When we cut to her apartment, typically at night, some day scenes, but typically at night, the camera is still handheld, but there's actually no movement in it. It's just sort of floating handheld. And it never pans or tilts or never does any movement. And the idea of that, the purpose was to show that when Frankie is sort of in her home, it's a bit of a safe place and she can kind of like let her guard down. And she's sort of, we're leaning into a lot of this sort of Paul Schrader, the lonely man of God in the room kind of motif, and instead this one it's instead of the lonely man with a journal, it's the lonely woman with a tape recorder. And so when we're with her, the camera almost takes a little bit of an omniscient sort of point of view, and that's another reason for never panning and tilting. She's in a safe place, it's quiet, it's the outside world can't hurt her in here, but also there's an omniscient sort of I don't want to say like a perspective, but there's a point of view that the thing doesn't move. And then when we go to the nightmare scenes, it's actually we almost the word that comes to mind is almost like nightmare Wes Anderson, where everything's very center frame, very symmetrical. We actually go either locked off on sticks or a little bit of steady cam work, and the camera same, like never really moves or pans or tilts, and and that was meant to bring this sort of rigid uh almost dreamlike, surreal kind of feeling where things are mirrored in the frame, or she's being lit with TVs and there's multicolored lights and there's blue lights and red lights everywhere. And so that's the idea for as far as camera language goes, mixed in with the color and lighting. How do we separate sort of I would say our three main languages for the film?
I did want to ask about prosthetics because I've talked about,
Mm,
or I've talked to people who've worked on old 70s films and they always struggled, or the struggle back then was like making it look real.
yeah,
And so I'm wondering what were some of the challenges and what were some of the things you learned about shooting prosthetics to get them to look real?
it's funny because going into a film like this, there's sort of the like there's the $5 million version of Gazer, there's the $20 million version, and then there's the reality, which what we had, which was very, 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 very low budget. And
Mhm.
so we knew we wanted to shoot prosthetics. To us, it was absolutely important to keep things as real as possible, as practical as possible. There's a version of this film that would have been leaning closer to like John Carpenter's The Thing, where we had animatronics and this and that. But just knowing that we had sort of limited resources, we decided to scale a lot of it back. And this is a lot of credit to our SFX artist, Jared Balog, who really presented us a lot of really great opportunities that worked within our scale. And so, in order to make those prosthetics work, and whether it's the hand in the chest, or the makeup effects, or the like existence homage, like flesh gun or whatever, we just knew that one, it had to be lit in a way that um helps it, doesn't hurt it. And for
Mhm.
us, that might have been maybe for the hand and the chest moment, that might have meant like I should actually choose the far side key this a little more, go a little brighter, and let it fall a little bit into shadow. Just because maybe it could have been something as small as like the difference between the Roger character, Grant Schumacher, the coloration of his skin on his hand was slightly different than the one on his prosthetic stomach. So then we knew, okay, let's actually lean into shadow a little more rather than overlighting it, just so that difference doesn't jar the audience, or even knowing that the flesh gun was going to be, or the flesh box was going to be of a certain pinkish brownish fleshy hue, and I'm overlighting this thing to be very warm. Let's make sure it doesn't blend too much with the wooden cabinet that the flesh box is in, or that it matches Ariella's skin as she holds the flesh gun, etc. So a lot of that, I think, played really in the color grade, some separation, but also on the day, just knowing, okay, this tone will work against this sort of mahogany TV stand where the flesh
Mhm.
box sits, or Ariella's skin tone does match this thing, or maybe on the day we'd suggest Jared, like, can we warm up the flesh tone on the gun a little bit so it matches your hand a little? So stuff like that I think you look out for on the day. But honestly and truthfully, you sort of just shoot it and hope it works. And all these things are just ideas that you have. We couldn't afford to do dailies for the film. So the way we would work is we would shoot for a couple weekends, maybe 2 or 3 weekends in a row. And then whenever the team could afford it, we would send out our scans, our film for processing and scanning, maybe a month or two later. Sometimes we went 3 months without seeing any footage. And so we didn't have the luxury of being able to shoot something and see it the next day and see if it worked. We would just sort of trust our intuition, trust our research, and shoot it and send it off. And thankfully, it always came back looking good.
Did you guys do any test shoots with the prosthetics to see how they would look, or
No, no testing. We
wow?
sort of I think they might have done testing on their own off camera. Whether it's Ryan with Jared or Jared and Ariella, maybe they did a little bit of testing, just make sure like to their eye it felt good. But we just couldn't afford any testing time. We couldn't afford shooting extra film. We just had to shoot it and hope it worked, and luckily it did.
Curious about creating high quality YouTube videos? Enroll in video editing and production classes at Manhattan Edit Workshop to sharpen your skills and turn a hobby into a career. Start your journey to becoming a pro today.
So, what was the scene you're most proud of the look of?
Oh man. I have two different answers, and I'll give them to you for two different reasons. I'm really proud of the I really like how the diner scene looks. There's something about the diner scene. We were Ryan and I, we were scouting multiple diners leading up to our shoot, and we found one that was going to be like a free location from a friend owned, but it just wasn't very cinematic. And we found another that looked really good, was way too expensive, and we were just like, man, we gotta find this diner. And I remember sort of growing up in college, I used to be in a band, and I would take this one road to band practice every week, and there was this really picturesque diner sort of sits right in the middle of like a split highway called the Bendix Diner here in New Jersey. And little did I know that it's actually been used in a lot of shoots. Like Martin Scorsese did a commercial there. Beyonce just used it for a music video. Like it's been a thing, but
Mhm.
I always saw it as this like kind of shitty rundown diner in the middle of this like New Jersey highway. But it just has this kind of classic look, the chrome sort of rounded edges with the ridges, and like a half burnt neon sign, Bendix Diner. And I always drove by. I never went in, and I said, man, it would be so cool to shoot something there one day. And then as we were scouting a diner for this movie, I remember telling Ryan, I was like, Ryan, there's this diner. We should go check it out. We just went there right on the day, walked in, and we only saw it during the day. We didn't know what it felt like at night. And we thought, man, there's a leaky roof here. There's this whole section that's not being used, et cetera. Like, I don't, but something about it just reads. And I think on the day when we showed up, we were able to see it at night. And I was so influenced by sort of like the half burnt neon sign, and there was more neon in the background and the gross green fluorescence. And we mixed it with our warm lighting, and just being inspired by that and throwing up a pink light outside and lighting warm and having blues in the background. I was just really happy. And then sort of a happy accident was when we were shooting, because we didn't see this place at night, only during the day during our scouts. When we're shooting the night scene, we're doing all these profiles, you see the cars zipping by in the background. And I just thought, like, man, like, maybe I should have expected that because we're on a highway and duh, that's going to happen. But you don't think of it. You're just trying to think like, oh my God, we're going to make the day, or we're going to get this shot. And I was so happy with how those images came out, because it was sort of like when you shoot on film, you always have an idea of what you're going to get, but then when you get the scans back, it's always a little bit of a surprise, and it's usually more good than bad. And that was just one where I was just so pleasantly surprised with how much more lively it felt that I didn't fully expect. I saw all the sort of the because and on this in this diner in this middle of the highway, there's neon signs for vape shops and shipping stores and whatever across the street. So you're seeing all these colors, and I just thought, like, for a film that's not, the film has a richness in color, but it's not overtly saturated or overtly colored in many scenes. I was really happy to see how that diner scene came out. And I guess the other scene I was really happy with how it came out, honestly, was the opening gas station stuff. Because of the way we had to shoot the film, everything facing the gas station was shot in 2021 in Jersey City, New Jersey, and everything facing the opposite side of the gas station where the apartment is, where Frankie sees the incident, that was in Montclair, New Jersey in 2022. And we just had to sort of that was probably a big test of our skills as filmmakers to sort of combine two locations and make them work on a tiny budget. Where Frankie is here at the gas station, flanked by like cool green fluorescence, and then our fake movie lighting. We're lighting for depth. We're like hopping fences to put lights up to light apartment buildings in the background, and then there's this element where like now she has to cross the street and look at a building that doesn't exist, and we did that and it worked really beautifully. And so I'm really proud of sort of how the movie starts, because I think
Mhm.
it does a really good job at engaging the audience. And I'm proud of the whole movie, but the diner scene visually, I was very happy with how that came out. It sort of tickled my DP brain in ways that where some of the other parts of the film, like the warehouse scene, is maybe a little more globally like fluorescent looking, or something's more globally warm, or some mixtures. I was really happy with how those two came out. And then a lot of our driving stuff as well.
Mhm.
Frankie, the actress who plays Frankie, Ariella Mastroianni, does not drive. She does not have a license. So we had to fake a lot of those driving things. And we're just towing the car on a friend has a towing business. We just put it on a flatbed trailer and try to light it and shoot it in a convincing way. And I think it really sold.
Now, I have one last question for you. What would you say is your favorite guilty pleasure film or TV show to watch?
Oh man. It's so funny because I feel like Gazer is such a brooding, atmospheric, moody, tense noir thriller. And I love films like Black Swan and The Conversation and Prisoners, that people would think like, oh, he's gonna have an answer like that as like a favorite. But when we say guilty pleasure, my mind immediately goes, this is so funny. Anyone who hears this is gonna laugh. My mind immediately goes to Step Up to The Streets.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. I saw that as a kid and it kind of just like did something for me. I think I always grew up wishing I could dance,
Yeah.
and I thought the music in that was so fun. I thought the final dance in the rain was really effective. And I just remember watching as a kid with I had some friends or some family or something, and just being like really affected by it. And it's funny because I am not a fan of the series. I'm not a big like franchise person, but that is like the one Blu-ray I have in my collection from the franchise, Step Up 2. And I don't think I ever even saw the first one, but that one for some reason, that's like one that I have very fond memories of. And every once in a while I'll go back and watch. That's definitely a guilty pleasure for me.
Well, thank you so much for letting me interview you today.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
And that's it for this week, everyone. Make sure to check us out at filmmakeru.com or, of course, on Instagram at filmmaker_you. I'm Gordon Burkell. Thanks for watching.